Gold Squad TV, Gold Squad TV, Gold Squad TV. Now, I was trying to get some rest and I was trying to get a nap, but I just couldn't help it. The subject's been on my mind since I had this debate with two of my younger siblings. I didn't say siblings, but younger coworkers or friends of mine earlier. And we were talking about the NBA. And I gotta admit, man, I was a little peeved. A little bit. I wasn't seriously peeved, but I was a little peeved in a sense because I feel like going back to the 1940s, late 40s when the NBA started. Yes, those guys weren't necessarily the most athletic guys in the world. But to say they weren't skilled per se is ridiculous. When they said, one of my homies said that guys were plumbers back then, back when the Celtics were winning titles in the 60s, 50s and 60s, and the Lakers were winning titles in the 50s, 60s as well. And how the game's evolved and it's gotten bigger, faster, and stronger. Those guys back in the day wouldn't be able to go against today's guys. I never understood why younger people, per se, have such disrespect for something they didn't see. It's crazy to me how one of these guys, it's a homie, but one of these guys try to sit there and say the game's definitely better to watch nowadays. Like, how would you know? Other than you going back and looking at highlights from back in the days, you didn't grow up watching 80s and 90s basketball. You're going to sit there and say in the 80s is when it started getting better. Like, no, that's not true. 70s, I don't know if people ever watched that 1976 Boston Celtics versus Phoenix Suns series. And mind you, there were no three-point lines back then. But that shit went 7 games and went down the wire. You know what I mean? It was a great, great series to watch. Rest in peace, Paul Westphal. Played for both franchises. Now, sure, Paul Westphal wouldn't be able to defend Shawn Kemp, in his prime. But that doesn't take away from what he had in his era. I'm not a believer of shitting on what made the game what it is today in order to make today's athletes better. It's kind of like the same thing I feel about rappers. Like, I'm a hip-hop connoisseur. I'm a part of this culture. I won't tolerate anybody disrespecting the culture. But what I don't like is when people who are in our culture try to disrespect by saying someone's better than the other person and then not even accounting for errors and just saying, well, that shit was whack back then. And I'm like, yo, you didn't even live in that era to even know. You would have to live in an era to even be able to have an opinion that's worth having. Basically, going back to basketball, if you ain't grow up watching Wilt Chamberlain, you would never know the kind of athlete and the kind of player he was. The dude was averaging 30, 20, and 20. He's averaging 50, 30, and 20 in some years. Numbers that you will never see again. It's pre-shot clock. Telling me Wilt Chamberlain, being as athletic as he is, wouldn't be able to handle himself against today's athletes is crazy to me. The dude was 7'3". He could jump a high jump. Bill Russell was a guy that also was an extremely athletic player. Wasn't a scorer, but he was a great defensive general. Run up and down the floor. He would run these young kids, these so-called athletes, out the gym. He didn't have the use of the weight rooms and all the special powders and proteins and the nutrition diets that you have today. Bill Russell was just a natural athlete. And he was an incredible natural athlete. Would he be better than some of these guys now? No. But he, athletic wise, he'd be running guys out the gym. I don't think these guys would be willing to go 48 minutes with no AC, with no air conditioning, with not to mention black segregation and going through the racial stuff that they were going to do back then. And, you wouldn't be able to survive. And to discount those guys that came before the 70s and 80s and saying, like, even going as far as to say that Jordan played against plumbers. That's ridiculous. That's the dumbest statement. You're discounting what Michael did. May I add, when LeBron came in the league, it wasn't all that great either. There was a lot of athletes, a lot of guys coming out of high school. But for every LeBron that was great, and for every Carmelo that was coming out of college one year and was great, there was a whole bunch of Kwame Browns. There was a whole bunch of Michael Olakandis out there. There was a bunch of Darius Miles out there. A bunch of guys who were just athletic bodies, but couldn't do anything and had no basketball skill. Stuff that you probably wouldn't see in today's game. Now, I'm a 90s head, 80s and 90s head when it comes to ball. So I'm always going to be biased towards my era. My homie Hakeem, salute. I don't always agree with you. And that's fine. We ain't always got to agree. I think that's the beauty of our debates. However, to sit there and say that physical play that happened back in the 80s shouldn't be a part of the game now, it's BS. The game would be a lot more interesting. It would be so much more interesting. You didn't live in that era. For you just seen highlights. You understand the headlines that would be on ESPN every day if Derek Coleman and Charles Oakley were going face to face after and only getting technical fouls after punching each other? That would be great. Now, it doesn't, if you wanted to solve the problem of basketball players going into the stands, all you have to do is do what hockey did and why don't you just go and seal the fans with plexiglass. That way, around the corner. That way, when they fight, it just stays on a court. I would have been more for that than just go and just completely take the physical part away from basketball. Right now, basketball's I love basketball, but it's becoming way too European. And when I say European, I don't mean that as any disrespect towards European people. But the style is a shooting three, layups, play no defense until the playoffs type of style. That's just not what it's not what I want to see. I don't want to see that. I want to see more physicality. In the playoffs, for the most part, there is a lot more physicality. You're playing harder. You're practically playing for your lives. That Toronto game that Toronto won, the game 5 that Toronto won in double overtime against the Celtics, for my money, despite the Celtics losing and me being a Celtics fan, that might have been the hardest fought game between two evenly matched teams I've ever seen. That game should go in the vault as being one of the best games to ever be seen played. That's the game, infamously, Kemba had 5 points in the game where everybody went in on Kemba. But if you watch the game, you see what the constant back and forth. It was legitimately a nail biter. You know what I'm saying? So that said, me being a sports head in general, I don't like when people disrespect athletes that came before. I just never understood that. Why would you disrespect Tommy Heinsohn as an athlete or Bob Cousy as an athlete and call him a plumber because you didn't get to see him? Yeah, those guys weren't going to jump out the gym and be able to do 360s, but for what they brought to the table, you know what I mean? Tommy Heinsohn, in a lot of ways, if you watch some of his highlights, there are a lot of basketball players such as Ben Simmons right now. When I watch Ben Simmons, I see a lot of Tommy Heinsohn. You ever watch Tommy Heinsohn's game? You can see those little running hooks he would do. And this is back in the 50s and 60s. And Tommy was an 8-time champ. When I see Ben Simmons going down the lane and doing swooping hooks from using both hands, that reminds me of an old style Tommy Heinsohn, game. The way his game is offensively. Now, you mean to tell me you're going to sit there and say, well, it was a big man's game, that's why, plumber. That's BS. It's BS. You go ahead and tell that to those guys that played in the 70s and 80s. You tell them that they're not good enough athletically to go against the guys. Now, I tell you, you're wrong. If you put Dominique Wilkins up in there, he'd be jumping and dunking all over these guys. They wouldn't even know what to do. Cramming he'd be doing to them dudes. Mind you, if you want to sit there and say Dominique was more modern, no, Dominique in 1982 came in the league dunking on dudes. Dr. J was doing cradles on dudes in the 70s and dunking on dudes, making posters on them. David Thompson, had he not gotten suspended for drug abuse, would have went down as one of the greatest players to ever live. The man inducted Michael Jordan in the Hall of Fame. There's a reason for that. All right, Clyde the Glide Drexler was out there dunking on dudes, gliding in the air. Hakeem Olajuwon was crossing dudes. He was the first center to have handle and moves and had multitude of moves, so you couldn't stop him at 6'10". You're not gonna tell me back in the day was whack compared to what it is now. You're gonna tell me Daniel Tice could guard Hakeem Olajuwon? I believe not. You're gonna tell me Tristan Thompson could body Wilt Chamberlain? Come on, stop that. Stop that. You know, Thompson can't even get off the barely even gets off the floor when it's jumping. You know what I mean? Anyway, you know, this rant is really more dedicated to the younger fans, and like, you guys need to start respecting, not only just respect your elders, man, respect what they brought to the table. There would be no NBA. There would be no basketball. There would be no Jaylen Brown, no Jason Tatums if it wasn't for Michael and Kobe's and Jerry West of the world. Everybody wants to forget Jerry West. He's the logo. Everybody wants to replace West with Kobe. Well, remember, Jerry West was the first dude hitting half-court shots going into overtime in big games. Say what you want about his finals record, but the man averaged 30 points a game almost every year. He was Mr. Clutch. He was Reggie Miller before Reggie. You know what I mean? And I'm going to do a video on Reggie Miller in a little while. But yeah, it's just, you know, the utter disrespect to me is crazy. You think John Stockton exists if Bob Cousy didn't before that? John Stockton played the 2003. He's one of the toughest, hardest guards to guard. He wasn't a great ball handler. He wasn't going to cross you over, but he was a very consistent player. The reason why he was in the Hall of Fame. It's crazy to me, man. Like, sure, athletes get bigger, faster, and stronger, but to sit there and say this whole argument goes in the same boat as when people try to act like age has something to do with you spitting bars and how you spit. Your bars. Like, KRS-One got out-rap anybody now. He spits like double entendre bars. He's been doing that since and going in and out of pocket since 1989. And people will sit there and say nobody wants to hear that 80s flow. Like, when have you ever heard KRS-One have an 80s flow in the 80s? KRS-One never, and even in the 80s, KRS-One didn't have an 80s flow. KRS was rapping like a 90s rapper in the 80s. You don't believe me? Listening to By All Means Necessary. It's the same argument. You know, like, you can't sit there and say rappers back in the day are not as advanced as today's rappers. Most rappers today don't even write their own rhymes. You know, most rappers now, they try to finesse it because they just know for a fact they just trying to get a check. And the rappers that are dope, they have to acknowledge the guys that came before them, because the generations before them, they were doing all the stuff they were doing. Mean to tell me half these rappers weren't inspired by Big L and Jay-Z's freestyle and Bobbito's, you know, and Stretch Armstrong's show? There's rappers that are dope lyricists that go out and listen to Kool G raps, and Kool G rap still rap half the rappers today and in his 50s. Hell, your favorite rapper Jay-Z could out rap some of your favorite. LL could out rap some of your favorite rappers. You know, you can't judge people's skill set whether you're talking sports or you're talking like you're talking like rap or whatever the case. Like, I'm using this comparison. You can't judge it based on age, because skills don't always leave. Your athleticism, maybe. You know, Jordan isn't going to come back and play basketball anytime soon. But I'm pretty sure if he played one-on-one on a court, he still got them fadeaways. He still got those patented fadeaways every now and then. He has go-to moves. I'm sure when LeBron's like 50 years old, I'm sure he'll have his go-to patented moves. I'm pretty sure those guys, they're competitors. You know what I mean? Kareem Abdul-Jabbar would play pickup games against Julius Erving, and he's still over there hitting jump hooks. This sky hook is the most unstoppable move ever in the NBA history. You're going to tell me plumbers were defending that? You go ahead and tell Mark Eaton, who was a 2-time All-Star. And Mark Eaton was actually almost taller than Kareem. There's enough of the disrespect, man. You know, enough of the disrespect. Stop judging things based on athletes getting bigger, faster, and stronger. Because no shit, every athlete is getting bigger, faster, and stronger. But also, there's a lot more nutrition and a lot of different things going into that. Why are we going to just ignore that Kareem didn't have muscle powders and all these things? I think Kareem had those. Kareem would be still playing right now. You know what I mean? You see LeBron playing to his damn near about to probably be playing in his 40s. You're gonna tell me he's playing on a high level just because he's in naturally great shape? No, he's putting millions of dollars into his health. You mean to tell me a lot of that stuff ain't legal? Say what you want. It's true. Gold Squad TV, subscribe, show your elders, whatever you do, show your elders in anything, whether it be sports or music, whatever. Show them the respect properly, please. Subscribe, hit the like button, salute, spread the love. I'm out for now. I'm going to do my Reggie Miller video probably right before the Celtics game. Subscribe. Peace.